I have with me today Ms. Lisa Curtis. She was the Senior Director, former South and Central Asia at the U.S. National Security Council. And of course, she is currently Director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. Welcome to ThePrint, Lisa, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Lisa, I'll quickly start, on Afghanistan, because we are going to see 1 year of completion, so to say, of the Taliban regime there on the 15th of this month. How would you assess what has been in 1 year? They are still an interim government. We saw some of the developments that have rapidly taken place since post 15th August 2021 with the killing of Al-Qaeda chief al-Zawahiri. So how would you assess everything?
Well, look, I think the elimination of Ayman al-Zawahiri on July 31st was a major counterterrorism win for the United States. And it shows that the U.S. Does still have the capabilities to take terrorists off the battlefield when it chooses to do so. So in a way, it vindicates President Biden and his claims that over the horizon counterterrorism operations can be effective. However, it does not justify the disastrous way in which the United States withdrew its forces from Afghanistan a year ago. The world watched as Afghans clung to planes as they were leaving. It was a very abrupt withdrawal, very chaotic, very little preparation. And I think that has left a stain on the Biden's foreign policy, as well as the United States more generally. So I wanted to make that point about the withdrawal and the bad impacts. But I think what's worse is a year later, we see that the Taliban have not changed. They are still oppressing women. They're not allowing girls to go to high school. They're not allowing women to hold most jobs. They can't travel out of their homes without a male companion. And, in addition to the fact that we know that Taliban has not broken its ties to al-Qaeda. We know this because Ayman al-Zawahiri was sheltering in a home owned by Sirajuddin Haqqani, the interior minister for the Taliban. So we can see that the Taliban has not changed, and it really is quite a terrible situation for the Afghan people.
That's interesting what you told me, Lisa, about the withdrawal, but also the fact that, post Zawahiri's killing, there is this discourse going on, which had happened earlier also, on the reliability or on the effectiveness of the Doha peace deal, right? Both sides have blamed each other of violating it. What is your assessment of the peace deal that was signed under the Trump administration with the Taliban, which the Biden administration also adheres to? Do you think they really take it seriously as far as the Taliban is concerned?
Well, I think the Doha deal is a very weak deal. It's not a good deal for the United States. In fact, I think it's one of the worst agreements that the United States has ever signed with another party. We can see by the fact that the Taliban is protecting al-Qaeda in the middle of Kabul, that the agreement doesn't really mean anything. It's meaningless. But I do have to say that when Secretary Blinken says that the Taliban violated the Doha agreement by sheltering al-Qaeda, really, I would argue that the way the Doha agreement was written set us up for that very thing to happen, because the Doha agreement does not demand that the Taliban break ties with al-Qaeda. Nowhere in the agreement does it say that. It does not demand that the Taliban eject al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. It simply says the Taliban won't allow groups like al-Qaeda to threaten the United States. But that's a very nebulous wording. You could drive a truck through it. And in fact, that's what the Taliban has done. By the fact that they're sheltering al-Qaeda, they're showing that the agreement itself is useless. And the second point is the agreement doesn't even mention women. So it really was not a good agreement. It's not helpful for the Afghan people. And it really is time for the Biden administration to step away from that agreement.
Mm-hmm. But do you think this is the reason why that the Taliban is really not scared of anything when they take decisions like closing down schools for girls and not having them reopen, or also, sheltering some of the dreaded terrorists?
Well, I think it begs the question of what the United States sitting down and talking with the Taliban is achieving. I think we have to ask ourselves, are we really getting anything from sitting down with the Taliban? Now, you might hear State Department officials argue that it allows us to continue to get out the SIV, special immigrant visa applicants from Afghanistan. So we are still allowing Afghans to come to the United States, those that were allied with us in our mission, that worked closely with the U.S. government. So that is helping to get those Afghans out. But what it's not doing is it's not helping the women and girls of Afghanistan. So I really think we have to weigh the costs, which are a generation of women and girls who are losing access to education, losing access to jobs. And these are people, we invested hundreds of millions of dollars in, providing them empowerment and the skills and the training that they needed. And these very women and girls that we have empowered are now facing this horrible repression. So I do think we need to question whether we engage with the Taliban at all, or we condition our engagement on them giving the rights that women and girls are due in the country.
Mm-hmm. Also, in this past 1 year, how do you see the style of governance of the Taliban, the Islamic Emirate? We've seen the foreign minister, Minister Muttaqi, traveling around the world, having diplomatic meetings, even sitting in Kabul. Do you see, the fact that what really baffles people is the fact that they have not got the official recognition technically, but here it is where, people and Afghanistan envoys of other countries meeting the ministers there. How do you see that?
I think it's wrong for Muttaqi and the other Taliban leaders to be able to travel overseas to attend international conferences like the conference in Uzbekistan just 2 weeks ago. I think this is absolutely wrong. How can they be allowed to travel around, gain legitimacy, while again, they have these horrible restrictions on women and girls that no other country in the world implements? What country tells its girls they cannot go to school, that they're forbidden from going to school? I think it's outrageous. And I think that the UN Security Council should reinstate the travel ban on the Taliban. This is a travel ban that was waived in 2019 under the Trump administration to facilitate peace talks so that the Taliban could travel to negotiate peace talks. Well, obviously the peace talks are dead, and there's no reason that the Taliban needs to be able to travel outside of Afghanistan. So I would advocate for the UN Security Council reinstating that travel ban. And in fact, it comes up for consideration on August 20th. So there's an opportunity for the U.S. to lead, to demonstrate that it is not going to continue to put up with the Taliban's repression of women and its lies on terrorism, now that we know they're sheltering al-Qaeda. That would be the first step that the United States should take.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that, the attitude within the Taliban government is now that, okay, even if you don't give us the official recognition, countries are engaging with us, we are open for business, people can come and invest. But do you think the environment is conducive enough to engaging with them? You can also see how India is also engaging with the Taliban. What is your assessment of that?
Well, again, I think any engagement with the Taliban should be conditioned on how they're treating their own people and what they're doing to ensure the country is not going to again emerge as a terrorist safe haven. Until we see specific steps on that front, I don't think there should be any engagement or investment in Afghanistan. So India has made its own choice to open up its office in Kabul. And, that is India's choice. But I think for the United States, the United States stands for democracy, human rights. Particularly the Biden administration has trumpeted that as part of its foreign policy. If that's the case, then they should be standing up for the women and girls of Afghanistan, first and foremost, which means not engaging, not investing. And the U.S. should play its leadership role in that way. But I think the bottom line here is the U.S. is not as influential in Afghanistan, and this is a fact. And so we're also going to have to look to the United Nations, other European partners, other countries that share the United States values of human rights and democracy, and look to those partners to also try to use their influence with the Taliban.
Mm-hmm. But Lisa, some also argue, especially Afghan scholars who are still working out of Kabul and in Afghanistan, they say that if you don't engage with the Taliban and if you begin to corner them, impose more sanctions, that is going to, accentuate the suffering that the Afghans are already having. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I think there are ways to get assistance to Afghans who need it. It's not easy. And I think that, working through the United Nations, the World Bank, there are ways to get assistance into the Afghans. I think it's a very fair point. So, if there's a way for countries to get assistance in and sidestep the Taliban as much as possible, I would certainly support those efforts. I'm not going to say that we shouldn't be getting assistance into those Afghans who need it. So there is things that we need to discuss with the Taliban in terms of getting the assistance in. I just think that we can do it in a way that is more low key. We can do it in a way, maybe it's a Zoom call, something that is not as high level as the Taliban attending an international conference in another country. So I think, that is definitely a fair argument, but I think we need to find a way to do that we're also signaling that there are consequences for the Taliban continuing to repress its own people, because it's not only the humanitarian suffering, it's the suffering that comes from being denied your right to education, being denied your right to work. And frankly, being denied your right to work is contributing to the humanitarian suffering. The Taliban are only hurting their own economy when you're denying 50% of your population from contributing to the economy and its socioeconomic development. You're only hurting your own country's economy.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming to the counterterrorism measures now, post-Zawahiri's killing, there is this question that has again come up whether or not the US is keeping a close eye on the AFPAC region. How much of that is a priority for the Biden administration, do you think, keeping in mind the fact that there is a Russia-Ukraine war going on, which is also keeping the administration engaged?
Well, there's not only Russia's war in Ukraine that's happening, but we now have a full-blown crisis in the Taiwan Strait, with China conducting provocative live military drills, live fire drills, massive amounts of warships going into the Taiwan Strait, aircraft transgressing the median line that's supposed to serve as a buffer between Taiwan and China in the Taiwan Strait. So we have a very large crisis now, full-blown crisis in the Taiwan Strait happening. So yeah, I think we have to see that the Biden administration has a lot on its plate. And Afghanistan will not get the same attention that it has gotten over the past 20 years. I think that's clear. But again, the United States can partner with other like-minded countries to, assert support for human rights. It can keep its resources focused on counterterrorism. We've shown through the drone strike on Zawahiri that the U.S. still has counterterrorism capabilities. It won't be putting as much resources as it had been, but we can still, focus some attention on that. So I think it's not just a matter of how many resources are on the problem. It's how strategic is the United States. Are the policies smart? Do they make sense? And that's why I'm making the point about the travel ban and reconsidering our engagement. We have to look, what has our engagement been getting us? What are some other tactics we can pursue? And it doesn't necessarily mean just throwing, a bunch of resources at the problem.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, you've watched this space very closely now. When we talk of the Taliban, it is not one unit as what it seems. It seems there are divisions within the senior leadership that is there in Doha and people who are ruling in Kabul. Then there is a Haqqani network. And of course, we have Pakistan playing the larger role. How do you see that kind of, the cooperation between them? Or do you think there is a rift growing? We can see the Taliban having, issues with the Pakistan regarding the Durand line. How do you see all of these developments going forward?
Yeah, I don't see any real major rifts within the Taliban itself. Clearly, the Haqqani network and the hardliners have the upper hand. And that's unfortunate, because I think there probably are some more reasonable leaders within the group. You look at somebody like Mullah Baradar or others. But unfortunately, they don't have the upper hand. It's the hardliners that are calling the shots. Look, it's been 5 months since girls were denied the opportunity to go to high school. Again, we saw Zawahiri being sheltered in the middle of Kabul. It's clear that the hardlines have the upper hand. I don't see any possibility of that changing anytime soon, unless, like I was saying, outside powers get a bit tougher with their engagement policies, with their assistance policies, because if we sort of, appease the Taliban leadership when the hardliners are in the ascendance, nothing's going to change. So I think we definitely need to consider a change in the policies. With regard to Pakistan, nobody's surprised that there are not issues between Pakistan and the Taliban over the TTP. It was clear that the Taliban had a relationship with the TTP, and they're not sacrificing that. They're committed to their ideology. When it comes down to it, it's the ideology. And the TTP, Al-Qaeda, other Islamist extremist groups have a similar ideology to the Taliban. And that seems to trump all for the Taliban. They're not going to go against an Islamist extremist group because they share the same ideology.
Mm-hmm. And going forward, do you think the Haqqani network we see these days, Sirajuddin Haqqani, going all over the place in Afghanistan, having this, addressing this mass gatherings, do you think they are going to play a larger role going forward?
Well, like I said, it does seem like the Haqqanis are in the ascendance, and they will continue to play a large role. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And it really is the outside powers, particularly the United States, that can change their policies so that we are not, further encouraging and emboldening groups like the Haqqanis to once again turn the country into a terrorist safe haven.
Mm-hmm. And my last question, Lisa, now that we have the Taliban for about a year in Afghanistan, in the rural areas, they have unleashed immense violence. Do you think they will be able to sustain this going forward? Or is it also going to be how they were in the past, when they were overthrown? Do you see that's the future for them, or do you think they're here to stay now? And
Well,
the world has largely accepted it.
I don't think the Afghan people will accept the increasingly harsh treatment that's being meted out by the Taliban leadership, including the Haqqanis. And I think what you'll see is more people gravitating toward resistance. We already see pockets of resistance, the National Resistance Front, Ahmed Massoud, Amrullah Saleh, based in Tajikistan. So I think you'll see more and more people resisting what the Taliban is trying to do. So, unfortunately, I think, that, is what we'll see. I mean, you can't hold down people, take away their rights, not provide them the benefits and services, and expect them not to rise up and not to resist such kind of rule. So I think that's what we can expect in the near future.
But do you think that the resistance movement still is sort of has any hope? Also, the erstwhile Northern Alliance, do you think they will be teaming up and doing something?
Well, I think it depends if they can come together. Right now, there's a lot of divisions among the Afghans that have, fled the country. And so it really depends if there can be some cohesion and unity among the different factions. There's no Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance was a group of different factions that came together for one purpose. We don't have that right now. We have the National Resistance Front, but there hasn't been a coming together of the different opposition forces. So it really is dependent on what they choose to do. Of course, the United States is not providing any material assistance to the National Resistance Front. That is not something that is the United States policy. I do think, however, that the United States should be engaging in discussions with these groups. I mean, look, we're talking about people that the U.S. partnered with for 20 years. The United States cannot all of a sudden ignore these people. The U.S. should remain engaged. The embassy, the diplomats in Tajikistan should be meeting with the resistance leaders who are based there, and just gathering information, talking. They are players in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I get to hear is that they have, problems of resources, having the monetary power to face the Taliban. Do you hear anything like that?
Yes, I think they probably do have resource problems. I think that makes sense. So these are issues that they will have to figure out and resolve. But as I said, right now the United States is not in a position where it's going to provide that material support.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for that insightful discussion. It was really very important that we speak to you regarding this 1 year of completion of the Taliban rule in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for talking to ThePrint. You please take care.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.